Hello, welcome back again to more VFX tutorials. In this one, we'll be covering some basic tracking and how to track motion in After Effects. Now, there already are a lot of good tutorials about that are out there for you to see, and I recommend those. So I'll just go over some extra things, some things that might not be covered, or just go over some important details to know about tracking. Now, of course, I got a little bit of footage here, and it's quite short, only less than a second maybe, but it'll work for our purposes. This footage actually comes from others that I've used from Adobe After Effects visual effects and compositing studio techniques. This is by Mark Christiansen, great book that I use in my course, and it's good for this type of stuff. So we'll just take a quick run through and look at this footage here. What we can see is that the camera is just sort of pushing into the scene. And that's really what happens. So if we're looking at our tracking information here, there are various things we can track. This is going to be a very simple track. At least that's all we need to do. And really, when you're going to track some footage, you want to start off by analyzing it, seeing what it looks like where it starts, seeing where it looks like when it stops, and then trying to decide what's your best tracking tool to use. We have a number of them that we can use here in After Effects. For this one, we're going to use track motion. Even though it's the camera that's moving, the same type of motion would happen if everything was moving towards the camera and the camera was staying still. So this is not really what you want for track motion, for track camera. Track camera is really for 3D tracking with a lot of camera movement. For what we're going to do here, 2D motion tracking will do just fine. So the first thing to do is we'll zoom into our footage here, is to take a look and see what are some things you can use to track. Now what you're looking for is differences in value of some sort between objects that are moving and objects that aren't. You're looking for a good deal of contrast, as much contrast as you can find. And you're also going to decide which parts you want to track and have the motion for. So you see we've got these stands in front of these people here, and there's a good deal of motion there, or contrast that we can use for the motion, and so we're going to use those. So the idea is if you want something to replace these, it was going to be sort of here in front of them or over them, it would move with these stands. So these are going to be the track points right here. So right here we have our trackers, and we've got our footage here. I'm going to click track motion, because that's what we're going to do. Now what you might notice is that immediately it jumps you out of your composition and right into the footage, and that's good. And there's a track point. Something else here, if we look at the options for tracking, and we can see a few of these, we'll go over the important ones that we need to know. There's your motion source. In this case, we only have one bit of footage, but it would be right there. If I look at the options, basically, how is the motion tracker going to work? What's it going to look for? The default is luminance. And so the luminance would be the dark to light values, and those are often easy to find. So that's the default. You can also choose RGB, and it'll use RGB channels and differences there to try and find things you can track. Or you can use saturation, saturation versus desaturated colors. So I generally keep things about the same here. And I'm looking for things that have a lot of contrast with value, and that's luminance. I might try RGB if there are other problems, but this should work. So I'll click OK, and there's the tracker. If you zoom in, this is the little point here that's going to look for a pixel and try and follow it. And this region around here is going to be the area it's looking at. This larger box, which is technically called a feature region, is going to look and see how much that pixel or a set of pixels moves each framed frame. So if the action is very quick and a lot of motion, we'd want to have a bigger region, a bigger feature region. For this one, there's not a whole lot of motion frame to frame, so it should be all right. So I can just grab this and put this here. You can notice that it actually zooms in and gets you a very exacting kind of precise point of where to place your tracker. So that's good. I might take this and sort of kind of reduce that in there just so it's looking just at that point right there. The feature box is probably just fine. You see how you can grab that and you can change its size, again, depending upon how much movement there is from frame to frame. But this is kind of a slow camera movement, so we're not really worried about that too much. Now what can we track? Remember, this is 2D tracking, not 3D, which would be camera tracking. And there are three things that we can do: position, rotation, and scale. Or we can do all of them. And in this case, we're going to want scale because, as you see, we walk through the frames here. It's getting closer to us, so it's getting bigger. What that means is that if you were to track these there and measure the distance between them, that distance would change. And so I'm going to click scale because we can see these things are getting bigger. So if I click scale, just automatically it gives me a second track point. Now if you can do just position, that's the simplest type of tracking, you only need 1 point. But it should stand to reason if you're going to do rotation or scale, you need more than 1 point because it's got to calculate the differences between the two. So I will move this second track point over here, zoom in a bit, and just kind of fine tune the region that we're looking at. Kind of place that, right about there, and adjust this feature region. But the default setting should be okay. This is not a very difficult tracking type of exercise. So we've got the distance here, and you can see how it's drawing a line between those two, and as it's going to analyze its track points, it's also going to calculate the difference between those 2 points. So when you have all this, you're ready to go. It's very simple. You're going to analyze the footage. And this is your analyze. That means it'll actually track and measure and look at those differences in pixels and record them. And you can go forward or backward, or you can go frame by frame. So if I'm at the first frame here, I'll do analyze forward and just click this, and it should run through. And what you will see, if I zoom in here, is that for every frame, it's going to show where that tracker was. So if I step through it, you can see it kind of going back there. And after you've done a track, what you want to do is you want to look and see if it's worked, if it's slid off where it's supposed to be. And it looks like this is a pretty accurate track. Everything's looking good there. And I'll double check and I'll look at this one as well. So it's always good to check your track and make sure that's accurate. If it's not, you'll have something to fix. In this case, we're looking good here. That's a decent track. Now, if I open up this this layer with the footage, I'll see motion trackers, and I'll see tracker 1. This is tracker 1, even though it has 2 track points. If you open that, there are the 2 track points. What you'll see is a keyframe for every frame. So unlike keyframing and tweening, the way tracking works is it actually manually puts in this keyframe every time. So if I were to click on these and, let's go back here, and open up these motion trackers, what I'll see is a position. And it should give me a confidence. You want a high number there, 99.2%. Confidence really means that it's accurate, an accurate track. And you'll also see an X and Y position. And as this goes along and changes, you'll see the X and Y position change. So basically it's kind of hand keyframed that. And that's all good, that's all we want. And that's the first step. Now we need to apply this tracking information to something to get it to move. So if I just really quickly here, go back into my main composition, because that's where everything happens, and I'll do a new text layer. So here's our text layer, and I'll type a little something here, and we'll change that text a bit here. Let's give a something that we can see a bit more, and take this size up. There we go. Okay, so there's some text, and we can see that as the footage is moving, we'd like that to kind of move with the footage as though it were in the scene. And we want to apply this tracking data from the 2 points, apply it here to this text. And this could be anything. It could be text, could be graphic, could be a special effect, could be a matte painting, could be anything that you're trying to replace. Could be replacing a face right here. Anything that you want. Within reason, of course, I suppose. So we need to find a way to apply that data. Now you can actually apply it directly so that all those keyframes and the tracking points get applied to this. But a better way to do it is to do it through an intermediary, a null object. So I'll go up here to my layer and I'll do a new null object. What that means is that the tracking data gets applied to the null object instead of to the text. And then you can more easily change the position and the scale and things of the text, while the tracking data sticks just to the null object. So I'll show you how that works. We need to go back into our tracker here. Notice how it's all blank. So I'll click on my footage, and it's still kind of blank. Motion source none. Let's click on the motion source. There we go. As I do that, it pops me back into the footage, away from the main composition. And the main thing we need to look at here, make a little more room. There we go. Is we've already done the tracking, and if we can look, we can see there's the tracking information there, the trackers. We want to apply it to a target. Now right here, After Effects says edit target. It really means apply to a target. It's kind of not great label there. So if I click that, it should show me all the items that I can apply the tracking information to that are in my current composition. So we don't want to do it to the text, but there's my null. I'll apply it to the null. We'll say OK. Now it's not done yet. We need to actually click here where it says apply. What we've done is we've just connected it, saying point to this target, the null, and now we're going to click apply. Now apply says apply dimensions X and Y. That's of course vertical and horizontal, and you can do X only or Y only. Personally, I've never really seen a case where you'd want to do either of those. X and Y really is what makes sense. So we'll do that and we'll say OK. Great. Now if we go back into our main composition, this motion right here is the null. Now, you can't really see the null, but you can see that it's applied this information to it. It's actually scaling it, and it's moving its position. So as I move through, you can see that the null ends up at 116%. It's scaling up, or it looks bigger because the camera is getting closer to it. And of course its position is changing as well. So because I tracked for position and scale, it's applied both position and scale to my null object. Now a null object is just an empty placeholder. It's just something that receives data. In this case it's received the tracking data. And so now I need to take whatever I want to move, and that's this text, and apply it or connect or parent it to the null here. And so you want to see parent and link in your options in After Effects. If you don't, you come to this top heading bar and you right click and go to columns. Make sure it says parent and link right there. And so for each of these items in your layers, you can parent it to another layer. And what that means, it will inherit the attributes of that layer. So here's my track, this layer. You can use this little thing here. I think it's called a pick whip. I like to just grab the drop-down menu. So here's my text. You see that? And I'll just click and parent that to the null. All right. Now see what happens here. So as I play through, you can see that the text is getting larger. Oh, there we go. The text is getting larger, and it's moving to us as though it were in position equal to right where the tops of these stands were. And that's it. That is tracking in its most basic form. Now for true compositing, you'd want to look at whatever you're adding in and linking with the track. You'd want to adjust the color so that it matched. You'd probably want to add some animating grain or noise. You'd want to adjust the blur so that it looked like the footage. But that's a compositing issue. This is just tracking. So this is the simplest part right here. This is motion tracking, and we've tracked the position and the scale to get it to match and look in like this. This is done a lot of times in commercials. It's done in movies. It's what allows composite elements, even backgrounds and matte paintings, to now move with the camera because of a very simple thing you can do in After Effects. Now just one more thing that you want to know is that while you're tracking here, you are want to be very concerned about what area you're tracking. In this case, I'm telling the footage that this is where this new element should be. It should be evened up with this. But notice how that my subjects here are against a green screen. So the way that this footage would really be used is that you would garbage matte out all this background, and you would key them out of this green screen to put a new background in. Could be all sorts of things, but you need to have that background move with them. And the background is not where these stands are. The background is where these little markers are here in on this back green screen. So if you're going to replace this background here, what you'd want to do is track these points. That's why these points are here, so that you can track the motion and add in your CG elements and match the movement. Because the camera films what's here. The tracker can't really see anything. The tracker is looking for points of contrast, and so it's not going to see any points of contrast. That's exactly what you don't want in your green screen. And that's why these are actually put in. Often they're a contrasting color, like a magenta tape with a little X, but in this case that's what they look like. So if we were going to track this background, put a new background in, it would just start the process over again. Let me show you what that would look like. So we're going to click on the footage, go to the tracker, and do track motion once again. It's going to pop us into the footage directly, and this time we have current track is tracker 2. Tracker 1 is just these guys right here, so tracker 2 is going to be this next item that we track. So we're going to do the same sort of thing. I'll zoom in a bit and I'll move this tracker. I'm going to place it right here on one of these points. Zoom in so I can see that. I'm going to place it right there and hope that it can catch and see that. So I'm going to tighten up that inner box. I'll leave the feature region about the same. And because we need to do the same thing, we need to track position and scale, I'll click scale, and there's my second track point. I'll move it over here. Let After Effects think for a minute. There we go. And I need to find another track point to do the same thing, just like I tracked with these stands here. So I'll move this and put that on this point. And this is exactly why these points are here, so you can track them and gauge that increase in size and position. Kind of pull that in a little bit. All right, so there we go. So this is our tracker 2. Notice if I open my footage here, motion trackers. Oh, let's collapse that a little bit. There's tracker 1 and there's tracker 2. Each one has 2 track points. So I've got the one footage has 2 trackers and a total of 4 tracking points, 2 for each one. Okay, so I'm on my first frame. That looks good. I've got these right here, and I'll just click the same thing, Analyze Forward. Oh, I'm seeing a problem here. Let's check this out. As I go forward, there we go. I'll step forward. I can see this track point moving along there. That looks okay. Now let's go to this one. See if there's a problem here. There's that one. Oh, you see that? For some reason, this track point is slipping. It's not following this spot. It's not really seeing that. So that can happen. I'm surprised that one worked and one didn't, but there seems to be a bit more contrast right in here. So if you come up with this situation where it doesn't stick with your track point, you may need to do this by hand. Now this is why there's the option of going forward 1 frame and back 1 frame. So I'm going to take this inner box here and I'm going to go and really tighten just right there on that this little square. I'll zoom in like that. I'll go back to my first frame, and of course the first frame looks good. Instead of analyzing the whole thing, I'm going to analyze 1 frame forward. Okay, it looks like it didn't quite match. So I'm just going to grab the whole thing and move it look back there. So what I've done there is I've actually made a new track point, a new set of keyframes for that. I'll analyze forward again, just 1 frame. Didn't quite work, so I'm going to do this by hand. Sometimes you'll need to do this. You'll need to go and analyze this and do frame by frame and manually do the track points if your tracker isn't following the point that you want. You may need to do this for the entire footage or just for a few bits or little selections of frames within the footage. But this is why it's so important to check and see and make sure that your track is working. So I'm working with a very, very short footage here, a short little movie clip, and that's what's making this a little easier to do this. If it were a longer one, I might choose a different track point or try another option. But I'm just showing you this right here that you may have to do this manually, at least at some point within your footage. And this is our last frame. We'll put that to right there. There we go. So now this is what I would expect to see. I want to see both those track points moving out. In this case, I've had to go in and fix them and do a little bit of manual tracking frame by frame. But that's what I wanted to show you, is that sometimes you do have to do that. Great. Now we'll go back to our main composition, and we'll see this. Now if I want to take this background data and the tracking data I just did and apply it to something else, I'm going to have to make a brand new null for that. So we'll go to the top here, and I'll just do a new null object, and it'll be fine. And then we'll go back into our tracker here. I'm going to click the footage and make sure I choose tracker 2, not tracker 1, because tracker 1 is the first set right here. So if I'm on tracker 2, I'll edit the target or apply that to my second null, the null 2, and say OK. Click the apply, of course, X and Y, and say OK. Great. Now if I look at that, that should be the null right there. And we'll go back into the composition. And so that should be working just fine. If I look at this null 2, I should see the X and Y and the scale changing. And what you should see, because this is farther back from the camera, as I go to the end, it has actually scaled up less. It's 109% as opposed to the track points here, which scaled up to 116%. So farther back is going to be less movement and less change. All right, so let's just see what that looks like. I'll just make a new bit of text here. So I will make a new bit, a new layer, a new text layer. Oh, not a solid. I want a new text layer in this case. And great. So here is my new text layer right there. And I will take and apply that, or parent that to the null 2. And if we just look at this, what we'll see is something like that. We should see that they move differently because this one is farther back based on that tracking data than this one right here is more in front. Okay, now one thing I want to show you is that because these are various text layers don't have the tracking data applied to them directly, they're parenting to a null, and the null gets the tracking data. It makes it then very, very easy to take and move them and readjust them. If I do that, then the tracking still works. If the tracking data were applied directly to this layer as a bunch of keyframes, you couldn't do this. It would really be messed up. Also, you notice how it scales as it comes up? What if this is a little bit too small? Let me just kind of scale that. I can scale it a bit here, like that. And then as I play through it, it's going to relatively scale up again. So this is why you always want to apply your tracking data to a null, and then you can parent whatever you want there. And this has, if I look at its keyframes, you see that its keyframes here with transforming, there's no animation happening here. It's sitting still. The position is not changing, the scale's not changing, rotation or opacity are not changing. So you can animate these separately if you want to than the actual track itself. So the idea here is that all these points and this bit of information is staying the same and not moving unless you want it to, and it's just picking up the tracking data applied to the null. And then you get something like this, which is just what we're looking for. Very quick and easy to do, and After Effects does a good job of it. There is a lot of good information out there on tracking. I encourage you to look at it, but I just wanted to show a few particulars here that you might find helpful, especially for doing a bit more or if you come across any problems. Hope you enjoyed this, and keep watch for the next tutorial.